Welcome to the Ultimate Intimacy Podcast with Nick and Amy. We are excited for our guest today, Dan and Kay Ockey, where we're going to discuss probably one of the most important things in marriages, which I will say that we have not done enough podcasts on this subject.
And this one thing almost wrecked our relationship. So
yeah,
super.
Absolutely.
I think when we think of like intimacy, we jump into like emotional and sexual intimacy, but financial intimacy is so big.
So don't turn it off. This is going to be a great podcast. And again, something that most couples can cause a source of contention in their relationship. So Dan and Kay, welcome to the podcast. Excited to have you guys on today.
Thank you. We're glad to be here.
Thanks so much for having us.
So as we kind of briefly hit, and those who have listened to the podcast, finances were something that almost caused Amy and I to get divorced. And you've heard our story. If you've listened to the podcast, we don't need to share it again. But we're big believers in how important finances are. And, often people think that, when finances cause problems, it's because there's too little finances, right? Or they're fighting about money because the money's not there. But we've often seen couples that have almost too much money, have financial issues in their relationship as well, too. So it's not just the lack of money. Sometimes it can be, plentiful and still cause relationship issues. But I guess let's dive in the line of work that you guys do in dealing with couples and finances on a daily basis. How do you see the impact that finances has on couples, and I guess more related to the happiness in their relationship?
Oh yeah, huge. Definitely a huge connection there. And I feel like we kind of hear that tossed around, statistics all the time of, it's the number one or the top three, or it changes exactly what it is, but that it's definitely a problem in a lot of marriages. But I love what you brought up of how it's not necessarily just the tactical side, the amount of money or what's going on there, but a lot of the emotional, how we were raised with money, our approach to money. And really, money bleeds into everything. I think sometimes we view it as a chore, a check the box, bills are paid, but it bleeds into how you raise your kids. It bleeds into where you're going to live, what kind of house you want, what you do for fun, if you travel or not. There's so many things. So really nailing this down really helps in all areas of your life to really be able to have better communication and better connection.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Okay.
We've worked with over 1,400 couples, so we've taken a deep dive at couples with all sorts of resources. And sometimes like you said, we expect that more money will solve our problems, but sometimes, as you also said, sometimes more money does really mean more problems. And without being intentional about it, without coming together as partners, it can cause problems, as you've experienced, that kind of seem bewildering. We're making more money than we've ever made. Why are we struggling with this? And it feels like if I just make more, it'll get even better. But we found that not to be the case. More income helps solve tactical problems, but it doesn't always solve the intimate problems in our relationship.
Yeah, I love what you said too as well, Kate, real quick, which is it's not always like how much money is made. It's also our how we were raised on money, or our perception of money. And in fact, I think that's what caused Amy's and my financial issues, to be honest, more so than the money side of things. I grew up in a household where I was constantly told, work for yourself, don't work for someone else. Amy grew up in a household that was opposite, where her dad had 4 or 5 jobs, worked 24/7, and the harder you worked, the more money you made. So when we came into marriage, I was trying to do things more on the self-employment side of things, which always didn't bring in the money. And, we had that disagreement, or I guess maybe looked at or perceived things differently when it came to how to make money. And I think that was really what caused the issues in our relationship. So it's more of the perception or how we looked at money, right?
I was all for being an entrepreneur. Like, my dad had his own business and he worked a full job. I think I love that you brought that up, because how we are brought up and raised, and our whole thought system on finances, makes such a difference. So what he's talking about is we were going through really, really hard times, and he was just trying to make money at this business. But I had a father that's like, well, the husband provides. He's the financial provider to the most part. And so I was just kind of like waiting for that to happen. And it just caused a lot of disconnect. So it's amazing how like finances, stress in finances, just, I mean, we've heard a lot of couples with like gambling with finance, like addictions like that, business dreams, like pushing yourself too far. Like what a disconnect that can happen when you don't have good communication around finances. And that's what it all comes down to, right?
Yeah, you're exactly right. Communication, which a lot of couples that are listening to the podcast right now are saying, you know, we have disagreements over finances. We argue about it, or maybe we don't even talk about it because every time we talk about it, it causes a disagreement. So do you have any, obviously you're working with a lot of couples and I'm sure this comes up constantly. Any tips or recommendations you have on better communication when it comes to finances, or how can couples have that communication without causing a big argument? I know in our relationship, I kind of tended to stay away from talking about it because it caused an argument. And that's kind of what we hear from our audience as well,
right,
is the source of contention.
Yes, 100%. First off, totally normal to do that. Not that it should be the way that we handle things, but that is so common that we just want to not talk about it. Even in society, finances are kind of a taboo topic. You don't want to make a comment about, well, how did you make this work? Or you think everyone else has it together. You're the only person that is struggling with this. So first off, that is totally normal. Second, I would say getting everything out on paper or computer in these days, right? But getting it out of your head and actually seeing the real numbers is really, really, really helpful. And that kind of, we tend to catastrophize things, we tend to blame, we throw things back and forth, and we don't really see what we're even talking about, right? We're just like kind of going in circles. You always want to buy meat, and we can't afford meat. You always want to, you know, go play golf, and we can't do that. Whatever the thing is, you know, that is becoming an issue. But once you can like zoom out and actually see, well, this isn't about golf, this isn't about meat, this isn't about whatever. What do we want out of life? What do we actually have here that we're working towards, and get on the same page of where you're going? Then all those tactical things tend to fall into place more once you have that overarching picture of where you're going, where are we now, what do we want out of life, and now let's make that happen.
Yeah.
Love it.
What are your thoughts? And I'm sure... Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was going to say, you know, a lot. I love what you were saying, and it sounded to me like you were saying do that as a couple, because so many people, especially if the husband's working and the wife's not, maybe the husband will say, well, I'm taking care of all the finances, right? I'm the one making the money. I'll make the financial decisions. And I think couples really fall into a trap, and that can cause a lot of conflict, especially when one spouse is kind of dealing with all the finances, and it's almost like the other spouse doesn't really know what's going on. And I would say for a little bit in our marriage, that was the case, right? Like I felt like, okay, I'm the man. I just got to take care of things. I don't need to worry Amy with things. I'm just going to deal with it. And that caused a lot of resentment and a lot of issues in our relationship.
Yeah, it's, you know, like Kay said, sometimes it's so easy to kind of make finances the chore that one of us handles. But it's our household resources. And so we have to be aligned. And that doesn't mean we're paying bills together and we have to go grocery shopping together and we're watching ourselves make the HOA payment.
Yeah.
But what it does mean is that we both know where everything is. We know where we're going. We know why we're going there. We've agreed upon the amounts of money that are going to certain places, and we're a team. And then the details of the execution of those things may be handled individually, but the overarching plan and where we're going and why is agreed upon as a couple. And that affects everything.
So what would you say if a couple is struggling with any of these areas? What would you say is the best tip to get on the same page, like right now? Like, how does a couple start this conversation? Like, we're disconnected, and like maybe both people don't know what's coming in and what's going out, and one's a spender and one's a saver. Like, how do they get on the same page?
Like Kay said, it's starting to get everything on paper. And one of the things when we say that is, a lot of people have already tried.
Yeah.
Right.
It's not that people are listening to this where they're like, I've never put my finances on paper.
Right.
Maybe you haven't, and that's okay. have money conversations before. And so what's really helpful to do is if I was to start today, I would do two things. One, I would get an Excel spreadsheet and we'd list out all of our debts, all of our monthly expenses, everything we have in our bank accounts, and just have it on a piece of paper or a spreadsheet. Doesn't matter. Make it simple, make it easy, and look at this together. And this isn't an argument about what it is. It's just this is what it is. It's not good or bad. It's just
it is.
It is what it is. Mm-hmm.
It is what it is. The second thing to do would be to start tracking where every dollar goes. And we think the best budgeting app on the planet is Monarch Money. That's what we use with all of our clients. And so you can hook all your accounts up to that and start to see all the transactions and all the spending. And that alone is just going to be really helpful. And again, it's not good or bad. It's just what is.
Yeah.
And just to have that visibility together as a team is the first step. And that's if you're both willing to have that conversation.
Right.
If you're both not willing to have that conversation, your spouse, maybe you are, your spouse isn't, you can still take those steps, and then it's, maybe it's inviting your spouse to listen to this podcast. Maybe it's just inviting them to look at the Monarch and say, I'm not blaming you for anything. I just want you to be aware, here's what the numbers are. And just breaking it down to simple steps. It doesn't have to be this huge thing. It's just being aware to start the conversation.
And I think when you I love it. Oh, I think when you throw it down on paper, you're able to see everything, and you're like, oh my heck, I'm spending $200 a month on Starbucks. Like, what's going on, right? You're able to see things that maybe you wouldn't be able to see clearly before.
Yes, 100%. And then you're able to start making decisions on how you actually feel about those things, right? It's like, okay, $200 on Starbucks. Well, maybe I would actually rather spend that $200 on this or that. Or, you know what, actually, I don't mind that. That is something I value and I want to keep it that way, So yeah, getting the numbers there. And then the other thing I was going to add to what Dan was saying is I think sometimes we get stuck so much in the day-to-day and how am I going to pay for groceries and rent and like all of that. And I think being able to zoom out and come up with where you actually want to go with money is so empowering. And deciding like what is our goal that we're actually working towards, because if it's just save money, you're not going to stick with that for very long, right? Just constantly tell yourself you're spending too much, you need to cut back on the coffee, you need to cut back on getting your nails done, whatever the thing is, like that's not going to be a good sustainable plan. Why do that, right? Mm-hmm. Why in the moment, why should I, $40 isn't going to make a difference, right? But being able to know this, by making these choices, I'm able to hit this goal that we both want, that we're both after, of buying a house or investing for the future or paying off our debt or whatever the thing is that you're after. That's going to be way more motivating to make those changes than if you're just focusing on all the little paper cuts, right?
Right.
Just little tiny things that are hurting your finances.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Love it.
Do you believe as a society that we have kind of, I don't even know how to ask this, like you look at a lot of budgets and a lot of couples. I feel like as a society, we've just kind of like with Amazon and everything's easy, shows up at our door. We've become maybe like, at least in America, a little more high maintenance. We have a hard time sacrificing things. Do you feel like that's just a huge impact on couples' finances and they're fighting about it?
Yes. I mean, I wasn't necessarily managing a household. We weren't managing a household together, even 30 years ago. But think about everything that's changed in the last 30 years. Think about all the things that we have that we didn't have to pay for before. All the technology that we have, all the travel, all the extracurriculars. The subscriptions, the ease at which we can have those things. I don't know if a lot of us would spend as much money if we weren't able to do it so easily.
Right.
And so I think that's a great point, Amy. And what I would say is I think it just means that we have to be more intentional than ever, which is, am I doing this because this is just what we do in America?
Right.
Or is it what we truly value in our family and in our marriage? Mm-hmm. And I would say absolutely. It's easy to become higher maintenance than it ever has been, but you don't have to be.
Yeah. Right.
We don't have to just because everyone else is doing it.
I love that you said that. There's this lady that always pops up on social media. I don't know who it is. I can't even quote her name, but like she's always like, you don't need this, people. Like every day it's like, you don't need that viral thing that's on TikTok. You don't need that. You don't need that. Like reminder. Like you don't need to have the new whatever. You can wear the same pants you wore last season. Like it's just, I feel like because of Amazon and everything showing up our door and a lot of like DoorDash kind of stuff, like we've gotten kind of lazy society. And that's costing us, right? That's costing us. And that I think that's impacting our marriages and our relationships, because when we can't be on the same page and sitting down and being like, okay, we can, like the subscriptions that you said, like we were talking about this before we started the podcast, just how much money is going out. Like we're kind of anti-debt people, but it's still, we have these conversations all the time, like how much money it costs just to live, even when you don't have credit cards. And if you do, like, just, I don't know, it's mind boggling how expensive it is nowadays. But
yeah, it's crazy.
It's hard.
One of the things...
It is.
Oh, go ahead. So, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
My apologies. I was just going to say, one of the things I've really noticed, at least in our relationship, is setting boundaries, like how important it is to set boundaries around money. And that doesn't mean that, oh, you've got to call me and get my permission to get a sandwich or, things like that. But establishing boundaries and say, hey, as a couple, if we're going to make it, if you're going to make a purchase over $500 or, whatever that is, whatever we've established, I think setting boundaries was one of the things that really helped us in our relationship to kind of understand, okay, what have we kind of both agreed on? And I'm not going to go spend X amount of dollars without her permission because it's a decision we're going to make together. How do you feel like boundaries can really help a couple, get their financial situation in order or create better intimacy when it comes to finances?
Yes, so many ways that it can help. But one thing that I thought of when you were talking about one of my favorite boundaries is creating a his and her fund. And basically having an amount, if you're in a lower income season, it could be, $20 or $50 or whatever. But that's just like a no questions asked, whatever, you can spend on whatever you want. Because I think there are moments, even if it's inexpensive or expensive, where you're just like, why would you spend money on that? Like, you just don't understand, like, their point of view, why that would be important. And having that freedom, whether you make a lot of money, if you're the lower income earner in your relationship, or there's only one income, single income household, whatever the situation that you're in, having that is so freeing. And I think sometimes, especially when we're in a tight situation, we tend to like ditch that. We're like, oh yeah, I'll just go to sacrifice everything at all costs, for my family to get this goal. But again, that sustainability is so much more valuable to actually get somewhere rather than just doing like a crash diet course with your finances and then going right back to where you were. So that's a huge boundary that I think helps a ton. And then kind of to speak to what you were saying, I think sometimes the hesitation with boundaries is that permission-seeking dynamic, which we agree, do not want that, right? Because that just creates so much miscommunication and nothing that feels good in a marriage, whether that's any sort of permission-seeking, we just don't want to deal with that. So being able to have that goal, have that visual that you both are looking at to know like, oh, well, if I go do this, spend $500 on some patio furniture or whatever, how is that going to impact our finances? I don't even need to go tell Dan about this. I look at our thing, I have access to all of this. I know exactly what this would do to our goals. So I'm not going to do that until, we can make that a combined priority to make this happen, whatever the situation is. So having those his and her funds for the small things, and then having the roadmap is what we call it, but the visual of your goals and where the bigger things fit in, and both of you being on the same page with the bigger things. I think the combination of those two boundaries really help to avoid permission seeking while still having the freedom and the excitement that comes around money. So it doesn't have to feel so like doomsday every time you talk about finances.
I love that.
When it comes to boundaries, his and number came to mind because that's often what clients love. It's just like so nice is each person has this allocated amount of money, no matter how big or small, that you can do whatever you want. And we think every couple should do it. But with that said, it comes to when you can put a financial system in place in your household where it creates natural boundaries like Kay was talking about. When we've agreed upon we are working on paying off this credit card, I now am going to think twice of, well, if I now go to Chick-fil-A for the 5th time this week, which I love Chick-fil-A.
It's our daughter.
We get it.
Yeah, right, exactly. Or I go to Costco and buy everything I want to buy there. How is this going to affect what we both said we want to achieve? And we also talked about how much we're going to spend as month on groceries or target and work towards. And so the boundaries, when we can come together and implement a system that we've agreed upon, it creates natural boundaries that we're now measuring ourselves against the system rather than each other. So it's not, you got to do this, so I get to do this. It's more like, no, we're on the same side of the table. We're working towards solving this challenge and this problem and making progress. And when couples start to make progress together, the permission seeking and the boundaries become more natural because we're working on the same team. And the boundaries become protecting our household and moving forward rather than it's me versus her or her versus me. It's not my way, it's not her way, it's our way.
Love it. And that's what like intimacy comes from, is like feeling like teammates, right?
Yeah, I was just thinking of an example. Amy and I have made a decent sized purchase this past month, and one of the things we did, which maybe we didn't do early on in our marriage, is we went down and we itemized every single cost, and we said, okay, what are we willing to spend on this? And we both agreed to that. And what are we willing to spend on this? And we both agreed to that. So now as we're going through and we're spending money on this, there's not any hard feelings like, oh, you're spending way too much, because we're like, hey, we've set a budget. We know what we're spending on this. And I feel like exactly what you've talked about in this podcast, I honestly can say, like, doing this was probably the clearest thing we've ever done together as far as finances. And we've been pretty good in the past, but this was so clear that, like, we know exactly, everything's mapped out. Like you said, we're together as a team. We've agreed to things. So we know exactly where each other stand. And it's actually been a situation that could have been extremely stressful and frustrating has been very, very smooth. And I would, virtually non-chaotic in any way. So
I think that comes down to, number one, communication, and two, having aligned goals, right? Like when you don't have aligned goals, that situation wouldn't work out.
Yeah, for sure.
So, and that takes, once again, good communication, right? So what is your advice for someone who doesn't have aligned goals when it comes to finances? Like, what can couples do to kind of find that middle ground when maybe one person is not anti-credit card debt and one is, or how did I word that? Like, one is a spender and one just really wants to save. Like, we have a lot of couples that are just complete opposites in this area, and it causes a lot of conflict.
Totally. And what we've found is most couples, and they want the same things in the end,
right,
but they disagree on how to get there.
Right.
Yeah.
So
true.
We want to go here, but how do we both get to that same spot? And so this concept of a roadmap, we really believe in the principle of one goal at a time. But one of the things that causes conflict is one spouse or partner will often feel, if we go pay off this credit card, or we make this investment, or we make this purchase, or we do this trip, you're just going to want to do another one rather than do this other thing that I care about. And so that's the power of a roadmap. The whole purpose of the tool of a roadmap is to align goals. And it's to take everything that I think is important, everything Kay thinks is important, everything we both think is important, and put it on paper, and then organize it in matter of priority, and have communication and a discussion about why are we going to do this first, and why are we going to do this next thing second. And when both parties can see on paper or on the spreadsheet or whatever, oh, we're going to do this, and then we're going to do this, and then we're going to do this, it allows for that alignment to happen. And all of a sudden it stops becoming, I got to do my thing and you got to do yours. But, oh, we're going to prioritize this thing together. We'll get it done faster because we're aligned.
Yep.
Right.
And then we're going to move on to the next thing, and then the next thing. And that's how you start making progress, is it has to stop, is you put everything you both care about on a roadmap, and then achieve those things one by one.
And I think that allows that delayed gratification of what I want or what what each of us wants separately because you know it's coming. Just like an example, quick example of that is when Dan and I were first married. A little tidbit into our story is Dan came into marriage with 20 grand in debt and
a lot of bad habits.
And a very large entrepreneurial mindset.
Mm-hmm.
And I came in, daughter of an accountant, no debt, hate debt, whatever. And that we really collided. And so at first, our mindset was, I'm like, we gotta get rid of this debt, we gotta save for a house, we gotta start investing. We're not even, we have no kids, we're in college, and
Right.
I'm throwing out all these bajillion goals at Dan of we gotta get our friends store, we gotta do this, this, and this. And Dan's like, well, someday we'll be making millions and none of this will matter. And I'm like, what?
You have to get there.
How is that? So huge, So anyway, our approach with this roadmap, we really were on complete different pages. And being able to put down, okay, I know you want to invest, but right now we're going to put everything we can to paying off this 20 grand in debt. And then after we do that, we're going to save this much for an emergency fund or whatever. And after we do that, we're going to do this. And putting Dan's entrepreneurial goals in there, putting income goals in there, all of that's going on the roadmap. That allowed both of us to be like, okay, well, this is what it is, then let's do it. And that is how we were able to pay off our 20 grand in 6 months while we were still in college.
That's amazing.
Both of us were like, we
awesome.
are on fire. Let's make this happen. Let's stop arguing about if this is the right way or if we should just, start a business or we should be doing this or this. Let's put all our energy into this and rip off the Band-Aid, get that out of here, and go in on the next goal. And I think that is so exciting. It's so empowering. It's brought us together so much more than if we would have spent all that time debating if well, should we do this instead? Or I think this way's better. We just both agree on the roadmap and we go all in on that one goal and then the next goal and continue to stack that progress.
Love it.
And it totally unified us. You talk about intimacy, right? It's when we were on the same page and we were achieving goals together, it made everything else easier. Not that it magically solved all your problems,
right?
But everything else was easier from that point. And because we could communicate about money, we started being able to communicate about other difficult things. And as we become parents and sex and all those things, it just makes it easier to actually be able to have conversations because we've learned how to work together to achieve goals on the financial side, and that it leads into everything.
Absolutely.
It doesn't solve everything.
I think from your experience, this just tells us that you don't have to be in a great financial situation, but if you're working together as a team, the rest of your marriage can still flourish,
right.
Even if you're not in a great financial situation, because you're now working together as a team, just like you did. And okay, we're $20,000 in debt. Let's work together as a team and get out of it. And as you do that together and conquer those things together, you're, like you said, every other aspect of your marriage is probably going to be so much better. So for those of you out there listening that are maybe in a difficult financial situation, your marriage all around can get so much better, not necessarily just by solving the financial issues, which will obviously help, but if you start working and doing that together as a team, you're going to see so many other aspects of your marriage flourish as well, even if you aren't out of debt yet, because that's something you're working together as a couple, as a goal. And I love what you've talked about as well too, is setting goals. I think that's so important. Amy and I are believers in vision boards and things like that, visually seeing what do we want to accomplish together as a couple, and like you said, how do we get there? Because if you don't have a goal, then you're just kind of endlessly wander and think, oh, we're gonna be, like you said, we're gonna be millionaires soon, so it won't matter. But you got, like you said, you got to have a goal
to get
and
there.
a goal to get there, right?
Right.
It's hard to get somewhere if you don't know where you're going.
You think about just, if you wanted to take a trip to Costa Rica, you got to be intentional about, are you taking a boat? Are you taking a plane? Are you taking a car to the airport? It's the same thing with money. If we want to be here, what are the steps that are going to lead up to do that, to help us both feel confident in being able to move forward together? Because I don't want to go without Kay, and I hope she doesn't want to go without me. But, Costa Rica is going to be a lot more fun if we're there together.
Right.
Yeah.
Than one of us is paying back.
Love it.
Yeah. I love your advice. I think this has been a great episode. Obviously, we could sit and talk for probably 20 hours about finances. I mean, there's a lot of things to cover. As we kind of wrap this up, what are maybe some just final tips you could leave to the audience about if they're struggling with talking about finances and getting on the same page, and this is just an issue in their marriage? What are maybe one or two tips that you could give them that could, help them get a little bit more aligned and on the right track? And
I think, like we said, putting it out on paper is like a great first step. I also think even if they're not quite ready to do that, to like be, they want to live in the dark still and not necessarily see reality yet. I think inviting them to listen to a podcast, but we have a free budgeting class, you could start there. But just getting somewhere in that where like maybe it's still kind of abstract and you're not getting into the specifics, but that can help. And then having some positive money conversations. What do you want out of life? What are you looking forward to? What's your favorite thing to spend money on? Like those things can help you just learn about your spouse and maybe learn about how they were raised with money, and that can help you both have some more understanding. To then when you do eventually have that conversation, because that is very necessary eventually to have, then you will be much more equipped to have a quality conversation because you actually understand a bit more where they're coming from.
Right.
Absolutely. You've seen, and in what you do, having a third-party resource or something to guide the conversation is just so helpful. Having a third party to keep you accountable, to guide the conversations, to give you instructions, to give you information. And sometimes we as adults, we just think that we should just know how to money because we're adults.
Right.
But 98% of us were never taught anything how to manage money in the marriage.
True.
And so we have to learn. It's okay. It's okay to just give ourselves permission that I don't know how to do this. We don't know how to do this. So let's learn. Let's go figure it out. There's plenty, all the information on how to manage money successfully exists. Let's go take advantage of it. Just like all the information, a lot of information on how to have a successful marriage or how to strengthen our intimacy in our relationships, it exists.
Yeah.
Right.
But we have to find it, we have to implement it, and it doesn't just happen. And so let's give ourselves some credit and recognize that we weren't just naturally born with the knowledge of how to manage money. And let's together go on a journey so that we can do more than we ever thought was possible.
Love it.
Well, and I think too, the more you learn, the better decisions you're going to make. So why not learn, right?
Right.
Instead of having maybe an ego thinking, I don't need to learn about that. But you mentioned that you have a free resource that people can, utilize to start getting in and managing this and helping with this. Can you share with our audience where they can find that, where they can learn more about what you guys do and all this great stuff to help their finances?
Absolutely. I'll send you one that you can also put in the show notes.
Perfect. Yeah.
That would probably be the best place. And then our website, senseifinancial.com, has one, but we'll send one to you as well that you can
Awesome.
put in the show notes.
Awesome.
Wonderful.
Yeah, we're also on LinkedIn and Instagram, but LinkedIn's probably where we're most active. Kay Ockey and Dan and Kay can look us up. But we would love for you to get to know you guys better and hear your takeaways, what you're learning. So feel free to send us a DM or reach out, and we'd love to hear from people. So
Awesome.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for both of you for being on the podcast and just kind of, I know we didn't cover as much as we probably wanted, but at least getting into it and helping couples, better understand how they can start talking about money without having disagreements, at least give them a starting point, because this is a big issue for couples, as you guys already know as well. We hear it all the time of how it's impacting couples' intimacy all around. And so we really appreciate you being on the podcast with us today. Again, you can go to the show notes and download the free resource that they have. And we really, again, just really appreciate you being on the podcast. And we hope all of you find ultimate intimacy in your relationship. Until next time.